In the beginning of the movie, a group of young people in prison uniforms work in the hot sun. It looks like they are digging in the middle of nowhere. A young boy named Barbag is forced to work in dangerous conditions, so he plans to get bitten by a snake to get out of it. The scene then cuts to a boy named Stanley Yelmtats walking down the street. He is knocked down by a pair of trainers that fall on his head. He decides to keep the shoes because his strange family is working on a way to make stinky shoes smell better. But when he tries to go home, the police stop him because they think he stole the shoes. It turned out that they belonged to a famous basketball player named Clyde Livingston, who had given them to a charity. The police take the boy home and explain what happened to his family. But the Stanleys aren't surprised, and they say that the bad luck is because of a family curse. Stanley is then taken to court, where a judge sentences him to 18 months in a youth prison called Camp Green Lake. There, he meets Mr. Sir, who is in charge. Sir is a very strict person, and he tells Stanley that there is no water for miles, so there's no point in running away from the camp. He also talks about the poisonous snakes and lizards in the area, which he says have killed a lot of people. Stanley is then given his uniform and told to build character by digging every day 5 feet deep and 5 feet around. Even though he isn't supposed to look for anything in particular, he might get a day off if he finds something interesting. In the next scene, Dr. Podansky, the camp psychologist, introduces Stanley to a group of boys with names like X-Ray, Armpit, Squid, Zigzag, Magnet, and Zero. Because he is the youngest, Zero is always quiet. After Barfbag got sick and had to be taken to the hospital, Stanley took his place on the team. Stanley tells everyone at lunch that he was wrongly accused of stealing Livingston's trainers. This is the first time Zero speaks up, which surprises everyone. Then, a flashback shows that Stanley's great-grandfather, Stanley I, made a lot of money on the stock market, but that one day, a woman named Kissing Kate Barlow stole it all from him. This leaves him in shock, and within a few months, he has no money at all. Stanley I had no other choice but to work on a farm in Europe. There, he fell in love with the daughter of his boss. He goes to Madame Zeroni, a local seer, to find out how to win the girl's heart. Zeroni tells him, though, that the girl is stupid and that he should move to the US instead. Stanley I thinks about it, but in the end he doesn't listen to the advice and goes to ask the girl to be his wife. Unfortunately, the girl's father tells him that if he wants to marry his daughter, he needs to bring a big, fat pig as dowry. Stanley I goes back to Zeroni, and this time she gives him a baby pig and tells him to take it up the mountain and let it drink from a natural stream. Stanley I agrees, and he says he'll go see Zeroni if he does well. He also says that he will carry the weak old woman up the mountain so that she can get her strength and youth back. At some point, the pig gets bigger, and Stanley I takes it to the girl's father. But, like Zeroni said, the girl turns out to be very stupid. She can't decide between Stanley and another guy who looks about the same. Stanley I is upset, so he takes Zeroni's first suggestion and heads for America. But in the process, he forgets everything he told her he would do. This makes the fortune teller so angry that she curses all of his male descendants for all of time. Back in the present, Stanley gets used to the way things work at the camp. He finds a fossil one day and shows it to his counselor, Dr. Podansky, in hopes of getting some time off. The counselor tells him, though, that the warden doesn't care about fossils. He also says that this place used to have a lake, and that the warden's grandfather owned all the land around it. The movie then jumps back in time to when the warden's grandfather was in charge of the town. Onions are being sold by a man named Sam. He likes Catherine, a teacher in the area, so he gives her a free sack of onions. She gives him a jar of peaches she picked herself instead. In the present, Stanley wins over X-Ray and others, so they let him join their team and call him Caveman. He is good at finding fossils, which is why this is the case. One afternoon, his mother writes him a letter, and he laughs as he reads it. Soon, Zero shows up. When he asks what's so funny, he admits that he can't read. He then asks Stanley to teach him how to read, but Stanley refuses, saying that digging all day makes him tired. One day, Stanley finds something that looks like a shell casing and has the letters K. B. on it. X-Ray takes it from him, though, and gives it to the counselor so that he can get the day off. The counselor then tells the camp warden, who turns out to be a woman, what he or she has found. She gives X-Ray a reward and tells everyone else to dig up his hole even more. Again, the movie jumps back in time 100 years. Sam goes to see Miss Catherine and offers to fix her roof if she gives him 3 jars of her spiced peaches in exchange. Catherine agrees, and as time goes on, the two of them get closer. But other men in the town start to be interested in her as well. One night, a man named C makes a pass at her, but Catherine ignores him completely. Even though Sam is done fixing things after a few weeks, the two of them still hang out. He gets up the nerve to kiss her one day. When Trout Walker sees this, he gets jealous and sets fire to Catherine's school. When the second person finds out about this, she runs to the local sheriff for help, but even he tries to kiss her. He also tells Catherine that her black boyfriend will be killed soon because he kissed a white woman, which is a crime. She runs to tell Sam, but it's too late. He's already been shot in his own boat. Catherine is shocked by this, so she decides to get revenge for the death of her lover. A few days later, she killed the sheriff and gave him the kiss right before she left. After this, Catherine never looks back, and her life as a criminal begins. She then steals from rich merchants and landowners, puts them to death, and gives them a kiss as a goodbye. This is why people call her Kissing Kate Barlow. After Sam is put to death, it never rains in the town, and the lake dries up. This makes Trout Walker's land worthless. Back in the present, Magnet steals a bag of seeds from Mr. Sir one day when he brings the boys water. Mr. Sir sees that the bag is missing, though, and he threatens to punish everyone. Stanley decides to take the blame for everyone else when no one else steps up. Mr. Sir takes him to the warden because he thinks the thief should be punished. The unpredictable warden, on the other hand, scolds Mr. Sir for making the boy stop digging. Zero digs his hole when Stanley comes back to the pitch to thank him for saving everyone. Stanley is moved by the act and offers to teach him to read and write. As they hang out together, Stanley figures out that the shell casing he found earlier was actually a lipstick tube. It was hers, and her name was Kate Barlow. Zero also says that his real name is Hector Zeroni at the same time. The boy is obviously related to Madame Zeroni, who cursed the Stanley family many years ago. One day, the person in charge finds out that Zero's holes are dug by Stanley. He tells them that they are both useless, which makes Zero so angry that he hits the man with a shovel and runs away from the camp. Later, the warden and other people in charge of the camp talk about how Zero got out. Because Zero is an orphan, they think he won't live more than a week. It turns out that his mother dropped him off at a park and never came back. Stanley hears the conversation, which upsets him very much. Later that night, he tells the story of how his great-grandfather Stanley Yelnada lived in the desert for 16 days after Kate Barlow stole his wagon. Stanley, I made it through because of a place called God's Finger. Stanley, I had gone crazy by the time he was found, so no one knows where it is. The next day, Stanley decides to run away to find Zero and save him. After hours of walking through the desert, he finds Zero sleeping under an old boat. The second one shows that he lived because he found jars of peaches in the boat. It is clear that Sam's boat belonged to him before he died. Then, in the distance, the boys see a mountain that looks like a thumb. Stanley stares at it for a long time, and all of a sudden it hits him that the mountain is God's finger. Hoping to find something, the boys start climbing the mountain, but Zero gets tired about halfway up and can't go any further. Stanley won't give up on Zero, so he carries him up the mountain on his back. By carrying her great-grandson, he unknowingly keeps the promise his great-grandfather made to Madame Zeroni. They find the rill when they get to the top of the mountain. The onions that Sam grew next to the water are also found. Back at home, Stanley's father finally comes up with a solution of peaches and onions to get rid of stinky shoes. Stanley is also found not guilty, and the family's lawyer comes to pick him up from the camp. But the warden doesn't say anything about Stanley's escape. The next day, Zero feels better and tells Stanley that he is the reason Stanley is at the camp. Zero stole the trainers from the charity auction without realizing it, and when he saw the police looking for them, he panicked and threw them off a bridge. Stanley's bad luck made it so that the shoes fell on top of him. When he hears this, he is surprised, but not angry. He is thankful instead because he found God's thumb. The movie keeps going back in time. Kate Barlow finally finds Sam's boat in the desert that used to be a lake that had dried up. Trout Walker and his wife come to where she is sitting alone and thinking about her dead lover. They want to know where Kate has hidden all the stolen treasures because they need money badly and have lost everything else to drought. Kate doesn't want to help them, so she does the unthinkable and lets a yellow-spotted lizard bite her. Since then, the wardens who came before Trout Walker, including the current one, have been searching the dried lake for Kate's treasure. Back in the present, Stanley and Zero go back to the field where he found Kate's lipstick tube to look for the treasure chest. In the end, they do get the boot, but then the warden and Mr. Sir show up and try to take it away. But when they see that the yellow-spotted lizards are on the boys, they quickly back off. The warden is still waiting for the lizards to leave the chest the next morning so she can steal it. The boys are still alive because the lizards don't like onions, which the boys have been eating. After a while, Stanley's lawyer and the police show up. The warden says that the boys stole her trunk, but Zero quickly disproves her claim when he sees the name Stanley Yelnat written on the trunk. So, Stanley is let go with the boot while the warden and her criminals are taken into custody. Also, for the first time in 100 years, it rains in the desert. Later, the boys go to Stanley's house, where they divide the treasure equally between the three of them. Zero hires a private eye with his new money to find his mother, and it turns out that she had been looking for him the whole time. At the end of the movie, the boys become neighbors and invite all the other kids who got out of camp to come see them.